Have you ever felt like you're just drowning in information? Research papers, articles, notes, they just pile up and you're thinking, will I ever actually get this? You're searching for that aha moment, but it's buried under everything else.
Information overload is definitely real.
Exactly. Well, that's what we try to do here on the Deep Dive. Think of us as your shortcut, your way to cut through the noise and get genuinely well-informed on some really cutting-edge topics shaping our world. And today, we're diving into something truly revolutionary. It's right at the intersection of, sophisticated technology, groundbreaking medical research, and a huge regulatory milestone.
Yeah, it's a really exciting convergence.
It really is. It promises to basically redefine how we understand, monitor, and ultimately treat chronic diseases. We're specifically talking about the first ever regulatory qualification of a digital primary efficacy endpoint.
That sounds technical, but the implications are massive.
They really are. This isn't just some minor tweak. It's a huge leap forward, especially for Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, or DMD, and it's been spearheaded by the European Medicines Agency, the EMA.
Right. And our mission today for this deep dive is really to guide you through all the layers: the analytical evidence, the clinical data, the patient perspective, everything that paved the way for this unprecedented achievement. We're going to be drawing directly from the source paper, which is Servais et al., published in Scientific Reports back in November 2024. It's titled Evidentiary Basis of the First Regulatory Qualification of a Digital Primary Efficacy Endpoint. So that's really our map for today.
Okay, great. And what's so compelling, I think, is that this isn't just abstract science or dry regulations. It's a story, really, about how something pretty simple sounding, an ankle-worn sensor, is fundamentally changing the game.
Yeah, it seems simple on the surface.
Right. But it's changing how we track disease progression, how we see if treatments are working, all in real time. And it's not just for DMD, is it? It feels like a blueprint.
Absolutely. It's a template, a blueprint for the future of medicine, really. It shows how real-world data can, dramatically speed up getting treatments to patients.
Treatments they desperately need.
Exactly. And crucially, proving that these treatments work with a level of precision we just haven't had before from real-world data.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Where do we start? So let's begin right at the heart of it.
Yeah.
What is this digital endpoint? The one that's got all this regulatory buzz. It's called Stride Velocity 95th Centile, or SV95C. In simple terms, it's the speed of the fastest 5% of a person's strides. Is that basically it?
That's the basic definition, yes. But the key is why the 95th percentile. It's not just an average speed, and that's deliberate.
Okay, why not average speed then? That seems intuitive.
Well, think about it. Average speed can be misleading, especially in progressive conditions like DMD. Someone's average walk might look okay for a while.
Even if things are declining underneath.
Precisely. Their underlying muscle function might be subtly weakening, but the average doesn't always show it immediately. But their ability to perform at their peak, that quick burst of speed to cross a room or navigate a crowded space.
Like reaching for something quickly.
Exactly. Those moments requiring peak ambulatory capacity, that's often where the earliest signs of functional decline show up. So the 95th percentile, SV95C, it zeroes in on that peak performance.
Okay. So it's more sensitive to those early subtle changes.
Much more sensitive, and we think much more clinically relevant than just an average gait speed. It lets us see those initial losses in functional reserve that might otherwise be missed in a standard clinical checkup.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just what they can do on average, but what their body is really capable of optimally. And the really neat part is how it's measured, right? Continuously.
Yes, continuously. In their real-world setting, at home, at school, playing, using this small ankle-worn device. It's called Actimeo, or SIDE.
And that's a fundamental shift, isn't it? Moving data collection out of the clinic and into daily life.
It's a huge shift. And the technology behind it is, pretty sophisticated. The device uses what we call magneto-inertial sensors.
Magneto-inertial, what does that involve?
So it's a combination. You have accelerometers, which measure linear acceleration, like moving forward or up and down. Then gyroscopes measure rotation, angular velocity. And magnetometers sense magnetic fields, helping with orientation, like a compass.
Okay, so 3 types of sensors working together.
Exactly. And the key is fusing the data from all 3. Because each has limitations, right? Gyroscopes can drift over time, messing up orientation. Accelerometers are sensitive to gravity. But by intelligently combining their signals, the device builds a really robust, accurate 3D picture of movement.
Even when movement isn't smooth or predictable, like in the real world.
Especially then. This fusion is critical for picking out those tiny, precise biomechanical markers, like the specific way the heel rotates, which tells the system when a stride starts and ends.
And how does it turn all that sensor data into the SV95C number? Is that complex?
It is. There's a whole signal processing pipeline involved. It's not just raw data. There are advanced algorithms, think pattern recognition, maybe like some machine learning techniques, filtering out noise, identifying what's a real stride versus just, shuffling your feet.
So it has to be smart enough to understand different walking patterns.
Yeah.
Because people with DMD might walk very differently.
Absolutely. It adapts. It identifies the start and end of each gait cycle, calculates the velocity and length for that specific stride, and then it aggregates all this super granular data over a set period. The recommendation is about 180 hours.
180 hours. Wow, that's a lot of data.
It is. But that's what gives you the robust calculation of the SV95C, that 95th percentile speed. It really is quite an engineering feat, turning complex real-world movement into such a precise and actionable metric.
It sounds incredible. So let's bring this back to the listener and to patients.
Yeah.
Why is this digital continuous real-world measurement so much more powerful? Why is it better than, say, the traditional tests done in clinics?
That really gets to the heart of a major challenge in clinical research. Think about the standard tests, like the 6-minute walk test, the 6MWT. It's been a workhorse, no doubt.
Yeah, you hear about it all the time in trials.
Right. But it's inherently just a snapshot. It's what a patient can do on that day at that time in a controlled, maybe slightly artificial clinic setting, often with someone watching closely.
The white coat effect.
Exactly. But what about their mobility later that day? Or tomorrow? What about when they're tired? Or when they have a burst of energy? Or just navigating their own home?
Things you'd never see in that 6-minute window in the clinic.
Never. Real-world data, collected continuously, gives you this vastly richer, more nuanced picture. It captures the natural ups and downs, the subtle day-to-day changes, and crucially, how people actually move in their own environment. Walking to the bus stop, climbing their own stairs, playing outside.
It's like the difference between a few photos and a continuous video recording of someone's functional life.
That's a great analogy. This shift from intermittent snapshots to continuous, ecologically valid monitoring, meaning it reflects their real environment. It's revolutionary. It gives a much more complete understanding of how the disease impacts daily life and how a treatment really affects that experience outside the clinic walls.
The context, the nuance, it just seems so much more informative.
Yeah.
But okay, for this to be used in clinical trials where drug approvals are on the line, SV95C has to be absolutely rock solid, right? Accurate and reliable.
Absolutely essential. Which
Wow.
brings us to the first big pillar of evidence. Analytical validation. This is all about proving the device itself is trustworthy, like making sure your measuring tape really is accurate and gives the same result every time.
Okay, so how do they prove the accuracy?
They tackled it in two ways. In the lab under controlled conditions and out in the field with actual DMD patients. In the lab, they did a meticulous study with 8 healthy adults. They compared the Actimier device measurements against what we call gold standard motion capture systems.
Those complex camera setups you see in biomechanics labs.
Exactly. Super precise. And the results. The wearable is 98.7% accurate in just detecting strides. That's impressive on its own.
Almost perfect stride detection.
And then the mean error in stride speed was only about 1 centimeter per second compared to that gold standard. Tiny. It translates to less than 2.5% error in both stride length and velocity at the 1 sigma level.
Can you just quickly remind us what 1 sigma level means in practice?
Sure. Good question. It basically means that about 68% of the measurements fell within that very tight 2.5% error margin. For a wearable tracking complex human movement, getting that level of consistency, that tightness, is really exceptional. It shows it can pick up tiny changes with high fidelity.
Okay, that's incredible precision for a wearable. But healthy adults might walk pretty consistently, how to do in the field, with DMD patients whose gait might be more variable.
That's the crucial test, isn't it? The field accuracy studies were just as compelling. They compared the automated SV95C measurements from the wearable directly against the traditional 6-minute walk distance observed by a physiotherapist.
So comparing the wearable's real-world data to the standard clinic test.
Yes. And the mean difference was tiny, about 0.75 meters. That's roughly a 0.24% error when you relate it back to the distance walked.
Wow. So the wearable data collected continuously in their normal life matched up almost perfectly with a controlled clinic test.
Remarkably consistent. It really builds confidence that the device accurately reflects a patient's functional capacity in their daily life, not just in the lab.
Okay, accuracy is nailed down. What about reliability? You mentioned getting the same result every time. How consistent is SV95C over, say, weeks or months?
Great point. Reliability is about consistency over time. If a patient's condition hasn't actually changed, you want the measurement to stay stable. The study looked at this using the interclass correlation coefficient, the ICC. It's a standard statistical measure for this.
And what did the ICC show for SV950C?
Exceptionally high. The overall ICC was 0.970, and the 95% confidence interval was really tight, 0.947 to 0.983.
0.97 is very close to perfect correlation.
Extremely close. It signifies really strong month-to-month reproducibility for kids aged 5 to 14. Even in the younger boys, 5 to 7 years old, where you might expect more variability just due to growth and development.
Yeah, you'd think their gait might change more.
Right. But even there, the ICC was still greater than 0.95. This high reliability is absolutely critical if you want to use this metric to track subtle changes over long periods in a trial. It means you can be confident that a change you see is real, not just random noise in the measurement.
That's fantastic consistency. But it brings up that question you touched on earlier. With continuous data, how much is enough data?
Yeah.
You mentioned 180 hours was the recommendation.
Exactly. That came out of the wear time optimization studies. It's a practical but crucial question for trials. How long does someone actually need to wear the device to get that robust, reliable SV95C number?
So they tested different durations.
They did. They specifically compared the variability, how much the SV95C measurement fluctuated when patients wore it for at least 50 hours versus at least 180 hours per measurement period.
And what was the difference?
It was significant. With 50 hours of wear, the variability was about 6.38%. Not bad, but when they increased wear time to 180 hours, that variability dropped quite a bit, down to about 4.41%.
Okay, so more data equals a more stable, less noisy measurement.
Precisely. That reduction in variability is why the recommendation is for at least 180 hours per period, which usually means wearing it for about 2 to 3 weeks continuously. That extra data smooths out the day-to-day fluctuations and gives a much more certain picture of their typical peak capacity.
2 to 3 weeks of continuous wear. That sounds like a commitment. How was patient compliance? Did people actually wear it that long? Because the best tech is useless if people won't use it.
You are absolutely right. Compliance is make or break for real-world data. And the news here was very encouraging. For the basic 50-hour threshold, 100% of patients met it.
Wow, everyone managed that.
Yes, which shows good initial acceptance. But even for the tougher 180-hour threshold, a really impressive 88% of patients met that target.
88% managed 2 to 3 weeks of wear. That's high.
It is. It speaks volumes about how practical and user-friendly the device must be. And maybe more importantly, it shows how willing patients and families are to embrace this kind of technology.
Yeah, it suggests they prefer this less burdensome, real-world monitoring, maybe?
I think that's exactly what it signals. It fits into their lives better than frequent clinic visits. And that high compliance is just gold for ensuring the data quality.
It really underscores the patient-centric aspect. Okay, so the device is accurate, it's reliable, and patients are willing to wear it. That's a huge foundation. But now, the next critical question. Does this SV95C number actually mean something clinically? Does it reflect things that matter to patients and doctors? This brings us to the second pillar, right? Clinical validation.
Exactly. It's not enough for the number to be precise. It has to be meaningful. Clinical validation is about showing that SV95C is a relevant indicator of the disease, of progression, or hopefully treatment benefit.
So how do you demonstrate that clinical meaning?
One key way is through convergent validity. Basically, does SV95C correlate strongly with other tests we already know and trust? Establish clinical outcome assessments, or COAs, that measure similar aspects of DMD function.
Like the 6-minute walk test again.
Yes, exactly. They compared SV95C against the 6MWD, also against the North Star Ambulatory Assessment, the NSARA.
It's a functional rating scale, right?
Yes, specifically for ambulatory DMD patients, and also the 4-stair climb, the 4SC. These are all pretty standard, well-accepted measures in DMD trials.
What I found really interesting here is that SV95C isn't just some new isolated number. It actually aligns with what clinicians already use and understand. How strong were those correlations?
They were consistently strong. At baseline, just looking at patients at one point in time, the correlations, the R values between SV95C and these traditional COAs were between 0.61 and 0.70.
That sounds like a pretty solid relationship.
It is. It means generally if a patient had a higher SV95C, they also did better on the 6MWD, the NSARA, and so on. But maybe even more importantly, they looked at changes over time.
Right, because tracking progression is key.
Exactly. They looked at changes from baseline to week 48, and the correlations between the change in SV95C and the change in the other COAs were still strong, ranging from 0.44 to 0.68.
So if SV95C went down, the other measures tended to go down too, and vice versa.
Precisely. It shows SV95C doesn't just measure the same thing at one point, it tracks changes over a year consistently with how clinicians traditionally assess progression. It's a dynamic alignment.
That dynamic alignment is powerful. Okay, so it correlates with known measures. What about telling different groups apart? Could it clearly distinguish, say, healthy kids from kids with DMD? That's the known groups analysis, isn't it?
Correct. Known groups validity is fundamental. Can the tool tell the difference between relevant populations? And yes, SV95C did this very clearly. The median SV95C for healthy controls was about 2.71 meters per second.
Okay.
For the DMD patients, it was significantly lower, around 1.56 meters per second.
A pretty big difference.
A substantial difference and highly statistically significant. The p-value was less than 0.001, meaning it's extremely unlikely that difference happened by chance. This clear separation really underlines its ability to discriminate, to characterize the functional status in DMD.
Crucial for monitoring, maybe even diagnosis down the line. But here's what gets me really excited, especially thinking about new treatments. Responsiveness.
Yeah.
Can SV95C pick up changes over time, especially subtle ones, maybe due to treatment or just the natural course of the disease? And could it do it quickly?
This is where SV95C really demonstrates its potential to be transformative. The responsiveness data is quite striking. Let's take steroid treatment, a standard therapy in DMD.
Right, steroids can stabilize or sometimes improve function, at least for a while.
Exactly. In patients who just started steroids, SV95C detected a significant increase in improvement of plus 0.090 meters per second within just 3 months.
Only 3 months to see a positive treatment effect.
Yes, and statistically significant too, p is 0.01. That shows its sensitivity to positive changes. Now, conversely, look at patients already on stable steroid doses, where we unfortunately expect gradual decline over time. SV95C accurately captured that decline. It showed a median decline of 2.5% at 3 months and a larger decline of 12.8% by 12 months, both highly significant.
So it picks up both improvement and decline. But you said 3 months. How does that compare to the traditional tests? How quickly do they usually show changes?
And that's the kicker. This is the real game changer. SV95C detected functional change significantly earlier, at just 3 months. Those traditional endpoints, like the 6MWT or NSAA, typically took 9 to 12 months to show a statistically significant change in the same group of patients.
9 to 12 months versus 3 months. That's a huge difference.
It's massive. Think about what that means for drug development. Detecting a treatment effect 6 to 9 months earlier, that could potentially shave years off the clinical trial process.
Years? How so?
Well, trials are long and incredibly expensive. If you can show your drug is working or not working much faster, you can make decisions sooner. Maybe you shorten the trial duration, maybe you move faster towards approval. For patients waiting for treatments for progressive diseases like DMD, where time is so critical, getting access years earlier, that's life-changing.
Wow. It really reframes the whole timeline. Faster insights, faster decisions, faster access. That's profound.
It truly accelerates our understanding of efficacy. It's a paradigm shift from long observation periods to potentially much more rapid feedback.
Okay, so it detects change early. But how do we know if the amount of change it detects is actually meaningful to the patient? A statistical change isn't always a change someone feels in their daily life. How did they define a clinically meaningful decline? You mentioned MCID before.
Right, the minimum clinically important difference, or MCID. This is about bridging the gap between the objective number and the patient's lived experience. It's not just about statistics, it's about relevance.
So how did they figure out what level of change in SV95C actually matters?
They used a combination of methods. The goal was to establish a threshold, a specific amount of decline in SV95C that corresponds to a noticeable, meaningful worsening for the patient. They determined this threshold to be in the range of -0.10 to -0.20 meters per second.
-0.10 to -0.20 meters per second.
How did they land on that range?
It wasn't arbitrary. They used anchor-based methods. This means they correlated changes in SV95C with changes in those other established COAs that we know reflect patient function and perception, things like the NSAA or patient-reported outcomes. These COAs act as anchors.
So if a drop of, say, 0.15 meters in SV95C consistently linked up with patients reporting more difficulty climbing stairs on another scale.
Exactly. That helps anchor the meaning of that 0.15 meters drop. They also use distribution-based methods looking at the statistical properties of the measure itself, like its standard deviation, SD, the standard error of measurement, SEM.
Which tells you about the inherent variability or noise in the measurement. Precisely, and particularly the minimum detectable change, or MDC. The MDC tells you the smallest change that's likely real and not just random fluctuation or measurement error. By combining these approaches, linking to patient-relevant anchors, and understanding the statistical stability of the measure, they could confidently define that negative 0.0 to negative 0.2 megameters range as representing a change that is both statistically reliable and clinically meaningful.
That's a really thorough approach. It ensures the numbers aren't just numbers. They reflect something real and important of the patient's life. Okay, let's shift focus slightly. We have the science accuracy, reliability, clinical meaning. But does it work in practice? Do patients and doctors actually like it? Find it useful? This human element, the stakeholder uptake, seems just as vital.
It's absolutely crucial, and innovation can be scientifically brilliant, but if people won't or can't use it effectively, it doesn't help anyone. The research dug into this through patient and caregiver surveys.
And what do they find? What do patients and families think?
The findings were really positive and insightful. About 58% of the DMD patients and caregivers surveyed said that top walking speed improvement was the most meaningful aspect of walking function to them.
Top walking speed. That's exactly what SV95C measures, that peak capacity.
Precisely. It's a direct alignment between what the digital endpoint measures and what patients themselves value most.
Yeah.
That's incredibly powerful validation.
That really is. What about their willingness to actually use the wearable and this monitoring approach?
Overwhelmingly positive there, too. Around 70% said they preferred wearable-based, real-world monitoring compared to traditional clinic visits. 75% were eager to wear the device in a trial.
That's huge enthusiasm.
It is. And maybe even more telling, about 45% said they'd be willing to wear it continuously throughout a whole trial.
Wow, nearly half would wear it all the time.
Yeah. What's fascinating is just how much patients and families seem to be embracing this. It really signals a preference for something less burdensome, something that fits into their lives more easily than frequent trips to the clinic. That acceptance is key for getting good, consistent data.
It really paints a picture of patient-centric trials becoming more feasible. They're saying, yes, this works better for us. Okay, what about the other side? The doctors, the physiotherapists, the people using this data. Did they see the value?
Yes, capturing their perspective was also vital. The researchers conducted online surveys with physiotherapists, clinical trial coordinators, and neurologists, the people on the front lines.
And the feedback?
Again, very positive. They showed strong positive attitudes towards the utility and the feasibility of using SV95C for continuous functional assessment. Clinicians saw the potential for getting a more comprehensive, objective picture of function outside that artificial clinic bubble.
Did they mention specific advantages they saw?
Yeah, they appreciated its potential to reduce the subjectivity that can sometimes creep into traditional assessments. And they saw value in having objective data to better manage patients, perhaps adjust treatments based on real-world function. It's this holistic endorsement from patients and clinicians that really strengthens the case for SV95C.
Okay, so we have the solid analytical validation, the compelling clinical validation showing it measures meaningful change early, and we have strong buy-in from both patients and healthcare professionals. This all leads us to the summit, right? The regulatory landmark, the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, formally qualifying SV95C. This feels like the moment where all that hard work translates into real-world impact potential.
It absolutely is the culmination. And the regulatory journey itself is interesting. It wasn't just a single yes. The EMA first issued a qualification opinion back in April 2019.
Okay, what did they say then?
At that point, they recognized the promise. They recommended SV95C, but as a secondary endpoint.
Secondary, not primary. Why the distinction back then?
They specifically asked for more evidence on longitudinal coherence. Basically, they needed more robust long-term data showing it consistently tracked disease progression over time and correlated well with how patients changed clinically over the long haul. They set a high bar.
So they needed more proof it could reliably track the disease journey over time.
Exactly. But then came the really big news, the monumental step, in July 2023. After reviewing all the additional evidence, including the data from the Servais paper we're discussing.
The evidence covering accuracy, reliability, clinical relevance, patient preference.
All of it. The EMA formally elevated SV95C to primary endpoint status.
Primary endpoint. Okay, let's pause here. Why is primary such a big deal? What does that really mean in the context of getting a drug approved?
It's a critical distinction, probably the most critical distinction for an outcome measure in a trial. A primary endpoint is the main measure the regulatory agency, like the EMA, uses to decide if a treatment is effective and should be approved.
So the whole trial's success hinges on showing a benefit on that primary endpoint.
Essentially, yes. Demonstrating a statistically significant and clinically meaningful positive effect on the primary endpoint is the fundamental basis for getting market authorization. Secondary endpoints are important. They provide supporting evidence, context, maybe show other benefits, but they don't typically carry the same weight for the approval decision itself.
Okay, so SV95C being primary means a new drug for DMD could potentially get approved based just on showing it improves this digital wearable measured outcome.
That's exactly what it means, and that is completely unprecedented for a digital outcome measure derived purely from a wearable sensor in the real world. It's a massive signal of regulatory acceptance and trust in this kind of data when validated properly.
That really clarifies why it's such a precedent-setting milestone. It's not just another biomarker. It's fundamentally changing the rulebook for demonstrating efficacy.
It truly is. This is the first digital primary efficacy endpoint qualification of its kind anywhere in the world. It formally validates that these kinds of well-designed, thoroughly vetted digital outcomes can meet the absolute highest level of regulatory scrutiny.
So it tells researchers and companies, yes, you can use these advanced digital tools as your main proof of efficacy if you do the work to validate them properly.
Precisely. It shows the EMA is ready and willing to embrace these tools within their formal frameworks. And, while we're focused on the EMA here, it's worth mentioning the FDA in the US has its own pathway for qualifying these digital health technologies, the DHT pathway. It's a global trend. But this EMA qualification really sets a very high bar and a clear example.
It really lays down a marker. Okay, so this is clearly foundational work for DMD, but it feels bigger than that. As we start to wrap up, let's talk about that broader impact. You called it a blueprint earlier. How so?
I think it absolutely serves as a blueprint, a paradigmatic model for how future digital efficacy endpoints can and should be developed and qualified. If you look at what SV95C achieved, it ticks all the boxes.
What are those key achievements that make it such a strong model?
Okay, first, high device accuracy, less than 2.5% error, proving technical precision. Second, proven reliability, that ICC around 0.97, showing incredible consistency. Third, and maybe most impactful, profound clinical relevance. It correlates with traditional measures, yes, but crucially, it detects meaningful change much earlier. That's transformative.
Right, the early detection aspect is huge.
Huge. Fourth, strong patient and clinician endorsement. It's feasible, it's accepted, people want to use it. Fifth, it satisfied that intense regulatory scrutiny across all levels, analytical, clinical, stakeholder input, integrating everything across multiple study sites. It's the whole package.
The whole package, rigorously validated.
Exactly. So this isn't just a one-off success for DMD. It provides a clear roadmap showing the level and type of evidence needed to get a digital endpoint qualified, potentially for many other diseases.
And here's where it gets really interesting, thinking about the future. Imagine the possibilities for precision medicine with this kind of detailed real-world data. Could it help us understand not just if a drug works, but who it works best for?
That's a huge potential application. This level of granular data could absolutely accelerate drug development overall, just by providing more sensitive measures, allowing faster go-no-go decisions. But yes, potentially identifying responders versus non-responders much earlier or more accurately, that opens doors for more personalized treatment strategies.
And it feeds back into making trials more patient-centric, doesn't it?
Completely.
Yeah.
Moving data collection from those burdensome clinic visits into the patient's home. It reduces their load, improves quality of life during a trial, and captures data that reflects their actual daily reality. That model seems readily expandable.
Expandable to other conditions.
Definitely. Think about other neurological diseases, musculoskeletal conditions, rare diseases where mobility or motor function is key. Parkinson's disease, imagine continuously tracking subtle changes in gait or tremor. Multiple sclerosis, monitoring daily mobility fluctuations, even post-stroke rehab or recovery after surgery.
You could track functional improvements almost in real time.
Potentially, yes. Tailoring therapy based on continuous objective data. the implications are really vast. It promises a future of more efficient, more insightful, and much more patient-friendly clinical research.
What an incredible journey we've taken today. Seriously.
Yeah.
We've unpacked the groundbreaking nature of SV95C, stride velocity 95th centile. We've gone through the rigorous validation analytical, clinical, and highlighted its truly landmark qualification by the EMA as the first digital primary efficacy endpoint. This deep dive hopefully has been that shortcut for you, our listener, to get really well informed on something that is genuinely shaping the future of how medicine is researched and practiced.
Yeah, and if we just connect it all back to the bigger picture, this digital endpoint, SV95C, it's more than just a measurement. It really represents a fundamental shift. A shift towards understanding disease, understanding treatment effects with a level of accuracy and real-world fidelity we just haven't had before.
Capturing life as it's lived.
Exactly. And that will directly impact how therapies get developed, how they get evaluated, how they get approved. It speeds everything up from the lab bench to the patient. So maybe the thought to leave with is consider how this approach, this blueprint, might completely redefine personalized medicine and patient care over the next, say, 10 years. It opens up possibilities for insight and responsiveness that were, frankly, pretty much unimaginable until very recently.
Absolutely. The future is being measured stride by stride in the real world. We really hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, giving you that valuable shortcut to understanding this pivotal moment. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. Keep diving deep, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.